Next, let's turn our attention to positive externalities. So we talked about negative externalities when actions by one person or parties exchanging goods might have negative impacts in other people. There's also situations where transactions or actions by a person have positive influence on other people. For example, wearing a mask not only protects the person, but it also protects other people. So vaccines or vaccinations are another example. Vaccinations is another example where you getting vaccinated for something not only protects you, but it affects other people, since some people can't get vaccinated. Education would be another example of something that might have a positive externality. So there's lots of research that shows that people with more education are less likely to commit crime, or there's more civil engagement once people ascertain like a certain basic level of education. And so in these kind of markets, if people don't account for the positive impact they have on other people when they make their decisions, we might underproduce the amount of people underproduce or under invest in, let's say, our education, or less people might wear masks or get vaccinations, then it would be socially optimal to do this. And so in this case, instead of thinking about the social cost being both the private cost and the external cost, we can think of like the social benefit being equal to the private benefit plus the external benefit. Hopefully that all fits on the screen. Where this external benefit, this should be a plus, maybe a different color helps with my writing. Where the external benefit here is the value of positive impact on bystanders. And so here, we can draw another graph as well. I forget which color I used for the graph on the other one, but we can draw another diagram here with the price and the quantity. And again, let's draw the supply curve where we can think about the marginal cost, and we're going to put a P there for the private marginal cost. Let's say we have a demand curve, and again, we're thinking about that as the marginal benefit curve, or in this case, it's the private marginal benefit. But then so it's just, right now we're just accounting for the private marginal benefit. And if we just account for the private marginal benefit, we're going to get QC amount of the good, because that's where supply and the demand curve met. But when we actually think about how this good has a positive impact on other people, we want to add the external benefit to this private benefit. So again, it might be changing with different levels of output, but the vertical difference between these two curves is going to be this external benefit. Maybe I'll write it over here so it's a bit bigger. So that's that external benefit kind of changing the height of this demand curve. So this is the demand curve, which is going to be the marginal benefit curve for the marginal social benefit. And so now if we look at the social benefit, marginal benefit curve, and where it intersects the private marginal cost curve, we see that this is the amount. We're kind of ignoring the price levels here. But this is the amount, Q star is the amount that actually maximizes total surplus, because it would maximize this big triangle here. And if we don't account for these positive benefits on other people, we're underproducing the good. So this is the underproducing this good. So with negative externalities, we were overproducing. We were producing too much because we weren't accounting for the negative impacts we were having on other people. Now, with something like education, if we don't account for the fact that we could have a positive impact on everyone by getting more education, we could see that we're underproducing this good compared to what we should want in our society. And again, when we're trying to think about solutions, we're trying to think of ways to get us to this Q star. And again, we've already talked about at least one way through taxation. In this case, it'd be subsidies. But we could also maybe regulate, and maybe there's minimum required education levels and things like that. And then the next chapter, when we talk about environmental economics, we can talk about the efficiency of some of these different solutions. So some possible solutions to this externality issue. We could think of some kind of government intervention. So this is a situation where governments can improve the efficiency of the market. So one option would be a command and control. Command and control. So this might be, this is what we say, command and control might be regulation. So that's one solution, the government kind of making some general rule about how much you can produce or the minimum that you can get or the use of certain products and you have to use certain production techniques or processing techniques in the production of a good. Another possible government intervention for solution would be internalizing or getting people to internalize the externality. So this is when the government might give incentives for people to start to account for their externalities, whether they're positive or negative, on other people. So for instance, with negative externalities, you might have taxes. You might have an excise tax. And again, we've seen that before where, with an excise tax, this is going to be a small diagram, apologies for that. Let's say we have this negative externality here. So the social cost is above the private cost. We could create an excise tax, which creates a tax wedge between buyers and sellers, that instead of getting this QC, we're using this tax to push us back to this optimal amount, which is Q star, where the social supply curve hits this demand curve. If we get a tax this big, an excise tax, I guess, this big. Apologies that it's maybe a bit hard to read there, but that's the idea for a tax. We can also think of, if we have negative externalities, a positive externality, what we could do is a subsidy, which is essentially just a negative tax. And so we're just trying to reward people for engaging in this behavior, to incentivize them to engage in more of it, to push us, we're underproducing when we have positive externality. So this subsidy might encourage people to engage in this behavior, this action more. So that's, a positive externality. So if you think, people maybe making gardens in their neighborhood or in their yard, I should say, makes the neighborhood look nice and everyone else can appreciate it, then you might want to have some kind of incentive to get people to do more of that. So maybe you award, a prize for the nicest garden in your community or things like that. So that's types of government intervention. We could also have private solutions. There's a famous theorem in economics called the Coast Theorem. It's a very short paper a long time ago, which basically says that if transaction costs are low and property rights are well defined, then two parties on their own can kind of come up with a solution to these externalities. So, if you have the right to have a quiet night's sleep, if that's your property rights include something like that, and Tully's barking, my dog's barking all night, then I have to compensate my neighbors in some way for my dog barking all night, or they have the right to kind of enforce quiet in some way. And so there are kind of private solutions as well, though we're going to really be exploring these government interventions and these possible solutions when we get to environmental economics. And we can kind of talk about why these market-based solutions, so these solutions where you try to incentivize people to behave the right way, can be much more efficient. No, we're getting allocatively efficient in both of them, but much more efficient in the sense of getting to this allocatively efficient amount at the lowest cost possible. We can do that through these market-based solutions, maybe rather than these command and control. But we're going to learn about that in environmental economics.